And welcome back to Fireplace Conversations with Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance. My name is Vincia Cloete, and it's so good to have you back tonight with us. Well, tonight for us in Namibia, and wherever you are, please, you feel free to be with us tonight. And I have on my panel tonight Mr. Robert Eiman on my left. I'm going to start with him. He has banking qualifications culminating into CIABSA. He obtained a master's in business administration through UNAM and Maastricht School of Management. Mr. Eiman has a career spanning more than 20 years with experience in retail banking, commercial banking, corporate banking, and development financing. His previous roles include retail, commercial, corporate manager in FNB Namibia, head of SME financing with FNB Namibia as well, and now currently he's the head of SME financing at the Development Bank of Namibia. He was a deputy chairperson or chairperson of the Namibia Chamber of Commerce, Windhoek branch, until 2015 that is, and he's a regular panelist for Global Business Labs in Namibia and an industry expert for various organizations, including Social Security Commission. And then I am also joined markets, fundraising, local government, project financing, real sector economy, and data analysis. His professional experience spans over 15 years, of which 8 years he has been at an executive level. He sits on several boards to provide strategic direction to the operations at those, and he's the founder and the head of High Economic Intelligence, which is also HEY, by the way, Pty Limited, and economic and financial services in consultancy. He has carried out several tasks, which includes national consultant. It's a drafting the assessment dimension of the CCA in Namibia, United Nations in 2022, which is current. He's the lead consultant in the African peer review management feasibility of establishing African credit rating agency, sectoral research and outlook of Namibia economy for Standard Bank in 2021, and currently serving as the chairperson of the Namibia Statistics Agency since 2021. Infrastructure Index for Standard Bank on the Namibia economy. He developed the Windhoek Economic Index for City of Windhoek. He's a member of the team that drafted the Harambee Prosperity Plan 2 on the economic advancement pillar in 2020. He's trained in Moody's rating methodologies, sovereign and country risk in 2019, established an unlisted investment. It's really a list, but you get the gist that there's Twapewa Kadhikwa. She's with us and she's already excited to be on panel, and you can see the excitement. You know how bubbly she can be. Excited to have you here. She's a career entrepreneur, by the way, and she serves as the chair lady of the Kadhikwa group of companies, which is interested in hospitality, agribusiness, capacity development, and property development. She's a non-executive director at the uranium exploration company, Bannerman Resources, and serves as the Namibia Industrial Development Agency, the NIDA chairperson. She's a graduate of the University of Namibia with a Bachelor of Commerce degree and the International University of Management conferred an honorary master's to her to acknowledge her achievements in the area of entrepreneurship and business innovation, which is quite interesting because that's exactly what we are talking about. So if you are wondering what we are talking about tonight, it's the governance of small and medium enterprises, SMEs. I think a lot of people are actually excited to be talking to us tonight about, for us to be talking to you about that. And with that long list of accolades for my guest, basically, which was absolutely fantastic. And, congratulations for this type of accolades to all my guests that come on set generally. So I'm just going to go right into the topic. And I'm now thinking, who should I start with? So, Mr. Eiman, just because you happen to sit next to me, I'm going to, you did pick the wrong chair. We're going to just go into what you think or what your experience is with small and medium enterprises. What is it? What are SMEs in light of the different growth stages? You have startup, you have active growth, you have organizational development, and then you have business expansion. But you don't have to, limit your definition of SMEs to just that. Just define to us what is an SME and how important are they for the larger economy.
No, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I think when I talk about SMEs, I obviously look at it from the perspective of a banker.
Yeah.
And how we classify SMEs. Look, we have the micro enterprises, and that's why they call it MSME.
Yeah.
The micro enterprises, which is not a part that we currently do, which is typically your very small scale, mostly informal type businesses. And then you have what we call the SME space, which is your small and medium. What we do is define it by way of the turnover. So typically any business with a turnover of less than 10 million in our context is regarded as an SME. And there is a similar viewpoint that is shared by other banks as well. So that is what they typically look at. Now, if you look at the type of structure, if you look at the type of organization, typically your SMEs is mostly the sole proprietors, the partnerships, as well as the close corporations. Now, we know that BIPA recently changed the rules where you can no longer conduct business as a sole proprietor or partnership, and you will have to transition into being registered as a closed corporation. But typically, or historically, that is what we've mostly seen with regard to SMEs. Hardly ever do you find an SME that is registered as a PTY, but there is instances where they are indeed registered as PTYs. Because PTYs, then it becomes very much more formalized, and it's typically the ideal form for larger enterprises. So from a banker's perspective, that is how we see SMEs.
And how important are they to the economy?
Look, I think it's highly publicized. It's not just a Namibian phenomenon. We know that many people, we call it the backbone of the economy. And it's mostly because of the ability of SMEs to employ larger numbers. If I look at, from my perspective, if I look at typically when we extend loans, and you look at the dollar extended and what it creates in terms of employment, you will typically find that SMEs has got a much more positive impact. Typically, you would find an SME or you finance an SME for lower amounts, but they tend to employ more people. So the dollars spent per job is a little bit more positive than what you might find with corporates where you can extend tens of millions of dollars and not necessarily generate that much employment. So it's very important. And if you look at the contribution to GDP, I know, it's a bit difficult to get those statistics or to decide on which is the right statistics, but typically they generate between 10 and 20% to GDP. So it's a very important component in the ecosystem of what we call the Namibian economy. And it's not just here. Obviously, this is pretty much everywhere.
And before I get to my two other guests, who I want you to just speak about the importance of SMEs rather than defining SMEs, because I think that was an adequate definition. I just want to ask you to park that thought on BIPA excluding, trading as a sole proprietor and as a partner when we speak about liability. Just keep it in your head,
right, sure.
Lest I forget about it. Ms. Kadhikwa, glad to have you on set. Can you tell us, you've been an entrepreneur for years, and so has Mr. Hay been, and maybe the two of you speak from the perspective of innate, or rather intrinsic experience of SMEs. How important are SMEs to the Namibian economy?
I'm trying to think which angle to start from.
Yeah.
It's like when you say you and Mr. Hay have been entrepreneurs for a long time.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, are we okay?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Are
Maybe
we
that
okay?
should be the question.
Right.
Like, are we okay? Because surely a backbone fractured, you know, if you look at our society, if you look at the biology, just the structure of any human being, you know, the skeletal structure, and you fracture that backbone, which is the, you know, the spinal cord,
Yeah.
then they are paralyzed. They can't move. And just one vertebrae removed out of that spine, it's an absolute paralysis. You know, a human being can operate without a leg, have an artificial leg, they can have an artificial arm, they can even have an artificial eye. But once the backbone is gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
And I think of late, the question is alarming. Is it true? And if it is, and they are fractured, are we okay?
Yeah.
Not only as Twapewa and Hay or Eiman, but as a nation, as a generation, as a people, as a continent. So that always disturbs me, because if I were a caretaker, I will handle this sector with care, because it has so much possibility, yet it is so vulnerable to many things. So if we look at our socio-economic dynamics and the population that we are laughing stock, not only outside, but even to ourselves, because I really believe we can do more and we can do well. But there's some disabilities spirit going on there, and we are now at a crossroad where we have to decide, do we believe in it? And if we do, we handle with care. And if we don't, we then must be ready to deal with the consequences of not taking care of this critical part of our body. I think entrepreneurship is a non-debatable issue.
Yeah.
It is proven academically, socially, historically. It is the only machine that renews an economy. It's the only machine that brings forth innovation, that brings forth new ideas, brings forth. For banks to exist is because entrepreneurs must give new ideas. I want to do a new business, and then the bank facilitates.
Yeah.
So the ecosystem is where my question mark comes in. And us now as the pioneers, if not by grace, what else are we doing here? Because I sometimes I'm totally puzzled at how I'm not in a wheelchair, because oh, for real, and asthmatic, you know,
Yeah.
self-declared asthma and self-diagnosed, by the way, and
Yeah.
self-treated.
Yes.
Because this the highs and lows and the challenges, they don't show that this is a critical sector. It's more like you're a liability, to understand. It is probably better, and that's why the young people, they say, I'd rather get a job. I don't want problems. How many years? 20 years. I don't want to wait. You wait that long to start something. Ma'am, I just want to know somebody to get a deal. Every shortcut. But economies can't be built by shortcuts. Economies need entrepreneurs who have failed. Failure is part of life. You know, it's failing forward that we must embrace.
You've mentioned a lot that I would really love to go into, but as we continue, Mr. Hay?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. I think I sort of want to pick up where Ms. Kadhikwa sort of at the tail end of her input, and the fragmentation that she's talking about is really around the framework that exists in the context of SMEs and why we are here in terms of the corporate governance. Now, in the context of what is the policy framework in respect of SMEs, I think the Ministry of Trade and Industrialization speaks about differentiation between micro, which essentially is 1 to 10 people, and then a turnover of 300,000 per year. Now, if you do the numbers quickly there, you come to around 25,000 per month as micro. Obviously, if you move towards the small, and which is from 11 to 30 employees and below 3 million. That's small. And then obviously medium is beyond 3 million. It's a turnover per annum, and then 31 employees going upwards. Now, obviously, the left hand is not talking to the right hand, because what Mr. Eiman classification speaks to in terms of the banking and the framework that has been set as what SME and should be classified as, obviously is different, right? Yeah. And this is the fragmentation that Ms. Kadhikwa was speaking about. That's why you find the disjuncture between the needs of, say, an SME in Namibia and what the market can offer as potential solutions. Now, if you look at it globally, you realize very quickly that the World Trade Organization speaks about 90% of businesses globally are SMEs. Yeah. 70% of people employed globally are employed by SMEs, and I think Mr. Eiman has spoken about that in terms of the multiplier effect if you give money to an SME. Now, in terms of contribution to GDP, it's extremely difficult to quantify it in a Namibian context for the reasons advanced in terms of the fragmentation, the definition from the Ministry of Trade, the definition from industry is different. But globally, again, it's around 50%, 50 plus percent. So the SMEs is not the backbone of the economy, it is the economy. Yeah. You see, good. SMEs are the economy. So the unfortunate situation is that in Namibia, we tend to not really sort of give it its due consideration, and this is what Ms. Kadhikwa was alluding to. Now, in terms of corporate governance and what you spoke to in terms of the different phases of the life cycle of an SME, I think we all have full appreciation that corporate governance is a big component of any value addition strategy. Yeah. I mean, you can't walk away from that. However, one needs to locate this in the context of the SMEs, within the local context, you know. So, and the reality is that not many SMEs leave the startup phase in Namibia. Sure. That's the reality. The majority of them actually dies within the startup phase because of some of the reasons that we have spoken to now. And we need to have the candid conversation in the context that if there's huge appreciation globally for the role that SMEs play, to the extent that we can classify the economy as the SME economy, what are we doing in Namibia to sort of feel that we are sort of outside of what the contribution should be of an SME? So there's a lot to be said in respect of the gaps that exist within the domestic market in terms of the role that SMEs should play, how you want to make sure that you link corporate governance in the context that when you've got corporate governance embedded in any structure, the financial sustainability of that structure is immediately improved, right, as a consequence of that. Yeah. But now if you've got SMEs that don't leave the startup phase, you know, what is it that we are talking about? Yeah, so I think I then defer back to you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I think you've all mentioned so many critical things that takes us away from the script. And I'd like for us to have such conversations that take us away from the script, basically. Because that candidness, you know, the guy on the street is listening to us, and a lot of people, like I've said in the beginning, are in a small, you know, that startup stage, that first stage that we're talking about, and they want to hear how they can get out of that stage to the next. And maybe this brings me to that question that definitely you have mentioned that it is the economy, yet we have not given it the prominence, right? SMEs have not been given the prominence, and even in my own mind, and I've never really thought of it as the economy because of the figures that I have not known about. So basically, if I had known, and if people who are doing business and entrepreneurs know their importance in the economy, perhaps there'll be a mind shift. And maybe my next question then is to say, why do they die at the startup, stage? And what are the governance, issues or governance challenges that they are facing? Mr. Eiman, can you think of any?
No, thank you. Look, I do agree with a lot of the sentiments that were shared here in terms of not getting out of that phase. I think it's not necessarily just a Namibian thing. I think it's also globally. And that is why the percentage of businesses that fails within that, almost that first 3 to 5 years is astronomical. I like the fail forward instead of just failing for the sake of failing. And there's obviously a lot of reasons why they fail. Governance could be one of them, but it's amongst many other reasons. Yes. But I think, look, once again, I'm talking from my perspective, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily the shared perspective, but from my perspective where I'm sitting, where these entrepreneurs approach me for funding, I sometimes think of it as that, that family business type problem. What I mean with that is many businesses actually start as family businesses, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, many global businesses and big multinationals started the same way.
Yeah.
But what I mean with that is sometimes when you have that, governance sometimes is not necessarily the priority.
Right.
Because, for a startup, and I think the entrepreneurs in the room can agree with that, sometimes you are just trying to survive for the next day. And sometimes that puts governance at the back. At the back of your mind. Because when you're so busy trying to survive, sometimes you don't follow the rules, because entrepreneurs needs to be dynamic. Entrepreneurs need to be able to change at the moment's notice. And sometimes when you have all these governance structures, it makes you a little bit immobile, in a sense. And that entrepreneurs don't like necessarily that, because they want to be able to make on-the-spot decisions, to change, to pivot, etc., etc. So for me, there is a very big problem as to why, or there is a challenge that I think is faced. And added to that, sometimes the proper systems is not necessarily put in place.
Right.
I mean, I see it from the customers that approach us, where I know that it's quite a process to approach, like a development financing institution that don't deal with transactional banking, where you don't have pre-KYC type things done, where you have to ask for a lot of information. And you can see that a lot of the times that information is not there. Tax clearances, even registration for tax, approvals from the city of Windhoek or the municipality to be able to conduct business from premises ABC, which all speaks to governance in one way or another. And sometimes those things do get neglected, because I think sometimes the urge to survive is so overwhelming that, naturally these things are neglected. And I'm talking about small. As they grow, sometimes, then they become, they become a little bit more dynamic. They appoint the necessary expertise to be able to assist them. They might appoint bookkeepers, they might appoint accountants, they might employ specialists. And that makes it, a little bit more dynamic in the sense of long-term survival. Because now it's not just the owner. The owner can now also sit back and say, what, I need to delegate this task. When you're a sole proprietor or one-man business, you are everything. You are the economist in your business, you are the accountant, you are the bookkeeper, you are the marketer, you are the driver. And that makes governance a little bit difficult because the thing is, everything stops with you. All decisions is just taken by you. So there's nothing wrong with it, obviously, but it is a problem, and that is why governance might not be top of mind for small entrepreneurs, especially in your startup phase.
I think, Salomo, you might have mentioned something to that effect. Can you elaborate on that, and then I'll come to Ms. Kadhikwa.
Yeah, so essentially what then happens is the inability to transition out of the startup phase into the growth phase. It means that you are heavily handicapped in terms of even considering structures, which comes as a consequence of the governance that you need to have in place. Now, if you look at where the global conversation is in the context of SMEs, you would have appreciation for that the Sustainable Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goal number 8 speak to SMEs being resilient in infrastructure and being able to contribute to inclusive growth. Again, I think me and Mr. Eiman agree on the multiplier effect of an SME. To what extent does the ecosystem locally, how is it friendly to make sure that we are speaking to these objectives where SMEs are the center of some of these SDGs. If you go further to Goal 9, which speaks around fostering industrialization and innovation, right? It means that the SMEs cannot do these things on their own.
Yep.
They need to operate within an enabling financing landscape, right? So, and the inability to have a friendly financing landscape, it means that we are in perpetual toiling of these SMEs, unable to get into the next phase. To give you a very practical example, and I think it's important to speak to those that are watching us to also, I mean, if you look at the number of graduates that we are getting through the higher institutions of learning, and especially within the computer science environment, which is really a big thing. I mean, I think there's now a task team, I think it's Monday that they will release their report. But be that as it may, the point I was going to make is that if you look at these luxury German cars that we have on the roads here, if there are certain applications on those cars that do not work in a local market, right? It only works, say, in South Africa and where they are manufactured. Right?
They only detect snow.
Imagine.
Now the point I'm making is please don't lose me on this one. It's critical because what you have is that you've got these softwares that can be developed by these entrepreneurs, right? And then you've got these big car dealerships, right? That sell these cars to us in that form without the full functionality of the car. But you pay the full price for the car. So the point I'm making is that to what extent are we able to look at the software developers, reaching out to them as a car dealership and say that, look, UNEM, there's this functionality of the software that I'm not able to install because it can only be installed within a certain GIS frequency, right? And promote entrepreneurship in that context. Because once you've got the software in terms of the need for these high-end vehicles, right, you would have an off-taker in the dealership, and then Mr. Eiman would be there to do the funding, right? Now, unfortunately, this is not happening, and this is the fragmentation that we see. Yes, and this is why you don't have SMEs, and especially in the Namibian context, being able to transition from a startup into growth. Because once you do into growth, then the corporate governance becomes the next step. Because obviously you need to make sure that there's proper structures because you are growing now, right? And once you grow, you go to the next phase. Is it the business development? What is it called?
That's the last one.
I mean, the expansion phase is the last one, right?
It's development,
it's development and then business expansion,
That's
right?
it,
Now, the expansion part is really where you want to see this business even being bought over. So you change lives. You know, this business becomes a real serious player within the market, right? And that's where corporate governance would then have to flow the natural course of how this business life cycle goes. Now, the reality is that we don't get there, and there could be different reasons for it. One of the most visible impediments is obviously funding. I think there is money within the system, but even if we do a quick analysis within the sector, just to understand how many financial institutions actually funds concepts, ideas, which is really the business of SMEs. You know, you would be hard pressed to find any financial institution that have funded an idea, a concept, and then grow it. And again, the conversation could lead me to say they are not venture capital, they don't move into that space. But the idea is this is the biggest, I mean, if you look at the sort of growth rates that the financial sectors get during downturns, you are really hard pressed to understand in which environment are they operating in.
Ms. Kadhikwa?
Okay, I have a confession. When you asked me to come, I didn't want to come.
Well, we had that
Yes.
conversation.
Yes.
Yes.
I was hearing noises in my head, and I was like, "Nee, man, to discuss what?" Again, since I was that age, we are discussing these topics, and you still want to call me a SME? Either something is wrong with me,
Right.
or something is wrong with the environment, because these young kids that we are mentoring, if we don't step up and step out into the next phase, we are killing them.
Yeah.
We should be mentoring them now and not be frustrating their growth. And this is one of the reasons why the young people are frustrated, because they don't see a pathway.
Yeah.
So I had that personal issue. I rebuked myself. I have since repented, Mr. Hay, Mr. Eiman. I'm now, confessing myself. Yeah, I rebuke myself. So there is a quote that I love to use. It's Hosea 4, verse 6. It says, "My people perish for lack of knowledge." So when I look at this story, I think it's a knowledge thing. And there's a difference between knowledge and education. So a startup entrepreneur is hard-pressed. They are in two categories. One is push, one is pull. The pull one is where we are. They get a chance to read, they get a chance to do feasibility, they get a chance to go for training, for a seminar. They even identify what opportunity they want to pursue. That's a pull entrepreneur. We need to classify them. And then there's a push entrepreneur. There's a chapter in my book about these type of entrepreneurs. The push doesn't have the luxury. They need to eat. So when you say corporate governance, they say, "Come on, please don't talk those things to me. I don't want to know. I don't. What vision? What's vision? Management accounts. What are you talking about? Leave me alone. I need to eat." And that is where the culture corrodes. Because in January they are doing Bitcoin, March they are doing chicken.
So factual.
Why are you not being honest? Let's
So
talk.
factual.
When was at the fireplace? No,
Yes. Yeah.
January, my sister, I'm doing Bitcoin, join me, we go to this great, that pyramid story. March, they're doing chicken. Oh, chicken is moving. You must join chicken. End of June, my sister, second-hand tires are moving. I'm telling you, I can sort out your tires now. That is now end of June. End of September, I'm selling suits from China. Can I sell suits to you? Now look at that mental state of that person. And that's where the majority is. Understand? I'm sure I was there as well. Now, knowledge must enter to avoid perish. If there's no platform for knowledge, there's absence of mentorship. Ultimately, even a bank folds its hands and say, "We can't do anything here because we are not going to run your business for you." So this is what's going on. Now, when I look at our national development goals, beautiful. We actually have 7 years to go to 2030. Okay, you tell me. 7 years. I look at my journey, and that's why I call myself a career entrepreneur, because it wasn't even classified as a career. It was like a second-hand or second-class situation. You failed grade 10 maybe, and you failed grade 12, and then you got pregnant 4 times, and you are useless. Then maybe you can Zula on. That's what it was classified. So to carry yourself and claim that position, yes, I'm a career entrepreneur, the same way you are a lawyer, the same way you are a banker. It's my calling, it's my qualification, it's my occupation. It's also where I'm occupied with. Some value has to be derived from that. So now you've got 7 years to go, 2.6 million people, 1.6 million are unemployed. Are below the poverty line if we talk about the latest World Bank report. Take a sellotape approach and just peel that figure, 1.6. If you go into that 1.6, it's black. So is our economy dual? Because if that 1.6 is got color and they are looking poorer and getting lower in terms of the quality of life, where is the value in terms of the economy? Because money will follow where the value is. Where we are sitting today, it was dormant land. Less than 10 years ago, it was a hill. Do you understand? An entrepreneur rose up. We know his name. He went to Nedbank. He made a proposal. Today, it's a facility.
Right.
He will go, should the sun set over his life, and a new CEO will come in.
It will not happen.
Okay, God forbid.
Hopefully not.
I say that because, with my training hat, when an entrepreneur is sick, the business is sick.
Yeah.
When an entrepreneur is depressed, which is most of the time, the business is depressed. When an entrepreneur dies, the business
also
dies.
dies,
So why
yes.
do we start? Why
Yeah,
did
and-
we start then if it's going to die when you're dying? Because you will die, to understand?
Yeah.
So for me, there's just elements that need to be reset. And either we move the goalpost of 2030 to 2050, or we start running towards 2030. To understand? Because all of us are affected. Understand? We're all affected. 80,000 graduates unemployed. What a catastrophe.
Yeah.
As a graduate, I'm in year 2 already. I should know what pathway I'm taking. I'm getting this degree because I want to go do ABC. What are you doing as a graduate and you can't even start potato chips company or business? Do you understand? So your qualification was or your training was to make you an artificial person. Because the purpose of education is to do what? Is to make you a better person for society.
Empower you, yeah.
Do you understand? And move your community from A to B, where B is a better place. So it's a conundrum of things, and I don't know if we will...
And yes, and
You
Ms.
get me.
Kadhikwa, I get you. There's a lot of conundrum that we've mentioned, but I also want us to shift to knowledge. You spoke about knowledge. That's very important. We've said that governance is but a sphere of, consideration for businesses. But you will understand that, governance is also a key factor. It's processes,
important.
it's systems, it's procedures, it's policies. All those things entail governance. And for a bank to finance an SME, certain things need to be in place, for instance, right? And what we want to teach the guy on the street who's trying to transition from startup to medium to, is knowledge, right? And that is a knowledge that I want us to impart to whoever is listening to us. And so my next question really is about, because we're speaking about the governance of SMEs, I really want us to go into, is governance really important? And if it is, how can we cascade it down to that level? Because generally, governance, is it speaks largely when you read the King 4 or the NAM code. It speaks largely to the bigger business, right? It speaks to the corporate that's sort of like set up already. But how are we cascading this down to an SME, to a small business, medium, and business that's supposed to be thriving in what we call this economy, which is, they make up the greater deal of the economy. Please go ahead.
Let me
Ms.
grab
Kadhikwa.
that one quickly.
Yes.
Twofold. So I always say I'm so privileged to be in these boardrooms.
Yeah.
Because every boardroom, I'm a director and then I'm a sponge. I'm at school. No, for real. I say
picking
it
up
like that.
everything.
I'm
Yeah.
a sponge. I'm literally sucking up literally 2 notepads. And I'm texting here, get this in order. When I come for the next meeting, I want to see this and that. And this is that's now that cascading.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if I would know what I know had I not had that exposure.
Yeah.
So to my mentors and the people that saw that ability to say, let's use it on this board and that platform, I'm eternally grateful, because even a degree will not teach you what you
Yeah.
learn in a boardroom. That's now number one. And I will serve on some boards,
Yeah.
until I die, because I really believe that it's genius that goes on there. I mean, to turn around an institution,
Yeah.
you use the same strategy and you go turn around your business. Okay, I haven't maybe turned around totally yet. The beauty is sitting here, but one day.
Yes.
Yeah, soon and very soon.
And that's the idea.
Yes. Now, secondly, as a trainer, we have an institution, the Academy of Entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And if I were a bank, on that list, the application form, give me that qualification. It's like giving somebody a driver's license and they have never gone to driving school or done learners. Dangerous. Collateral is not enough. Viability of the business plan is not enough. Offtake agreements is not enough. This person will collapse on the highway because you don't have control of those trucks and the business troubles that are on the highway. And that's where the collision comes. So if I were a bank, to just put my governance also and my security, come with your certificate from an institution like ours that tells me when the time comes to set up your committees, your board, management accounts, you know what to do. Now we've got entrepreneurs being funded on the back only of collateral. Collateral will never run a business.
Right.
A competent person will run a business. A competent and confident entrepreneur. And knowledge gives confidence. Someone who has no knowledge, you can look at their body language. It says, I don't know what I'm doing. I had the collateral, I had the connection, but I'm actually not sure what I'm doing. So that is your role as now the climate, the ecosystem starts to shift around. I would probably take that direction.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're putting your money in a open water hole.
Mr. Hay, you mentioned, you actually subtly mentioned how governance is important because it leads to funding, and a lot of investors clearly, they look at, your governance model in order to, and investors include the bank to do some funding. How can you augment that statement?
Yes, so the point that I was making was that corporate governance is a critical component to value addition, right? Once you've got corporate governance embedded in your strategy, the likelihood of arriving at value addition is high, right? It means that I'm removing myself as Salomo from the business. The business take a life of its own. I need to be able to make sure that this business can operate and not die and get sick with myself. And what then happens is that you start having building blocks within the business, right? The building block speaks to cash flow projections. It speaks to market access. It speaks to turn around. It speaks to break even. It speaks to threshold. And those are the building blocks that corporate governance will give you.
Right.
But the reality is that, or even once you have scaled to the level that there's been expansion, a risk investor or a bank for that matter, they would look at certain things, and one of those is the structures that you have in your operations. How solid are they, and to what extent have you been able to run the business sustainably? What is the profitability of the business in the short term, in the medium term? And you can only have these sort of targets in business if you have corporate governance embedded. And the reality again is that, or maybe your question should be, can we have startups, right, graduating to serious growth, right, without these corporate governance structures, right? So is it either or? Are these two mutually exclusive or not? So the point I'm making is that the environment need to support SMEs to be able to graduate into the growth phase, which will come as a consequence of having these corporate governance principles in place. And this, and I don't, and here I'm not referring to having the different subcommittees, having a fully fledged board. No. I'm referring to just making sure that your OPEX, you paying your rent.
That's it,
yes, you're making sure that you account for every cent that the business spends. You're able to claim your tax return, which will mean that the business continue to function. So those are the sort of fundamentals that you need to start with to be able to graduate into a fully fledged growth And once you're into growth phase, then you are into the business development. Where are the new areas that you need to move towards? And that's when the bigger boys can come in and say that, look, this component of your business we are buying over, which is then the expansion. But they will only be able to carry out a proper due diligence, provided that all these building blocks are in place. So without that, we could be going in circles.
Yes, and I think, and you are correct, we could actually be going in circles without that. And one of the things that you might have mentioned subtly again is compliance, right? And you mentioned it as well, that you need to have certain papers in place for that consideration to come. But then when you were speaking, I just thought that a thought came to me that was mentioned in the beginning about sole proprietors, that the guy who runs the business as the owner is also the guy who manages it, and he's also the bookkeeper, and he's all those other things. So, for instance, to be compliant is perhaps difficult. And maybe the question then is, how do we get ourselves to a place that we get out of ourselves as the entrepreneur, to expanding a little bit more, and that knowledge thing comes in, where we step out of ourselves and say, because I need to do this compliance, can I risk a little bit more by, because you want to keep all the cents that come into the business? Can I sacrifice a little bit more in order to pay that second person who's going to do the compliance aspects of the business or the bookkeeping aspects of the business? And maybe entrepreneurs need to start thinking in less selfish way for the sustainability of the business, because you've mentioned that when they are sick, business is sick. When they, when they die, business dies, and we want sustainable, businesses that grow into bigger, because he's actually mentioned in the beginning that it is SMEs that have grown into bigger banks and so forth. So for them to go into that, I think corporate governance is important. We just need to cascade it down. And I want to sort of have us speak about that aspect of corporate governance, where we say corporate governance, like I said, was largely meant for the big, standing institutes. How do we bring that down to the smaller businesses? What is your thought on that? What can you say practically to the guy on the street? How can he transition from just that briefcase governance or briefcase business into really starting to grow his business?
I think one of the things, is being a responsible corporate citizen, and corporate doesn't mean to the size of that, but it touches so many facets of the business. Being ethical in your business, being responsible in terms of, pay your employees, pay them on time, deal with all other commitments, pay your tax in time, etc., etc., etc. Because these are compliance issues at the end of the day. And this is typically when it comes to financing, when it comes to investors, etc. These are the important things. From an entrepreneur, and you've said it well, if the entrepreneur is sick, the business is sick. And it's because sometimes there's no division between the entrepreneur and the business. And yes, you mentioned that maybe not to be selfish, to maybe spend a little bit extra. From an entrepreneur side, that is easier said than done, I suppose. Because at the end of the day, when you're in survival mode, depends on where you are in your growth phase. If you are still in that survival phase, then maybe it's not that important. Maybe you will rather not sacrifice a 10, 20,000 to appoint a certain specialist to be able to push you. But this is where, there is gradual growth. Businesses and entrepreneurs also realize that at some stage it becomes critical for your business, especially when you want to move from point A to point B. So in the grander context of things, is it important? Yes, it's absolutely important. Is it as important for that startup vis-a-vis somebody that's in a growth phase? Maybe not. They have different approaches and they have different viewpoints. Something that I've always said, it doesn't matter how small a business is, especially in that growth stages. People sometimes underestimate the importance of a mentor. And for me, that is important. There's a lot of people that has been through the trenches that is not necessarily chasing money anymore. They might be at later stages of their lives in terms of wanting to give back. And why not tap into this wonderful resource where you basically almost have that compliance and that governance aspect in one person? These people has sit in the boardrooms of the world, So people, and I don't know of many people that refuse when asked, to mentor somebody, especially people that is genuine in what they want to do. So I think that is one way where entrepreneurs can tap into that wealth of knowledge to try and improve the business overall, because these people will guide them in terms of what is necessary. As an entrepreneur, you have to decide, is it worth me spending money on whatever I need to do? But in the grander scheme of things, if you want to grow from point A to point B, at some stage, it becomes critical. It's no longer a case of wanting or whatever. It becomes critical.
I think so. Because, just as a principle of life, in order to gain something, you got to sacrifice a little bit more, and not just at times, but generally.
And maybe before I see you want to get the gender parity right.
No, I actually would have loved to have anyone speak. Please go ahead, Mr. Hay.
So really also, it's always important to give context in terms of the environment that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
Now, the Namibian economy is really a tender-based economy. That's the reality of our economy. And there's, and there's not necessarily, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that sort of approach, because it's also one way of really empowering SMEs, right? Now, and why I'm bringing this up, I'm linking it to the compliance component, which speaks to governance and which speaks to growth as a consequence. So with tender submissions, generally, there's a big compliance component of it, right? So you need to make sure that your tax is in place, social security, the whole works.
Yes.
You need to make sure that your document is initialed. You need to make sure that your pricing has taken a certain structure, and right. So these are all the sort of governance issues that you need to strengthen. And that's so it will stand you in good stead going forward, because you would have mastered the art of compliance at that level. You see, and these are the sort of messages that we should bring through to the SMEs. These are the sort of messages we should bring through to the entrepreneurs. That the fact that someone on the other side know and is able to not strictly adhere in one form or the other to the compliance criteria. It's doing you an injustice going forward, because in the real world, where you need now to scale, where you need to start going international for market access, it will really be on your product offering, your service offering. And once you have mastered the compliance, it will be so much easier to sell. So the governance issues in the context of the SMEs should not only be looked at what we know as the governance structures, which is the board, which is the SME.
Yes.
So you see, that compliance component that already it's already being requested at the tender. Where you're supplying books, where you're getting onto a database to supply, all of that, request for proposals, all of that. So in the context of Namibia, that's already a governance component of the SMEs. And this is what you need to strengthen. This is the message that we need to bring through.
And I think before I go to you, that aspect is important for growth, right? Because that foundation that you're setting, because compliance in a sense is you getting all your ducks in a row, right? And that foundation that you set can only grow. You can only get better. Next time you only know what better to do. And that is how growth comes into being. And I think the person on the street who's selling fat cookies might not be able to speak to what we're speaking now, but there are other things that they can do practically that also speak to governance in an informal sector, right? But the other SMEs that are a little bit more, yes, more formal in the sense that they're able to bid, for instance, to provide tender documents and so on. They should be able to hear this message and get themselves to a place where they're starting to grow, so that investors have genuine interest in them. Because I think generally, as the backbone of the economy, or as the economy itself, they would be, as the economy itself, they should be recognized, but they should also bring themselves to the table where these things are important. And Ms. Kadhikwa, I am running short of time, but I want you to weigh in on this aspect, and then I will get us to closing.
Okay. You see, when she mentioned time, she emphasized on me.
No, because you haven't spoken yet.
When Salomo was speaking, I was like, hey! Man of God, you are preaching.
He's saying stuff.
Maybe just to emphasize, because there's no doubt that the compliance element is in. But my angle is the understanding why.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
that's good.
I've come across too many that don't know why. And that's corporate governance. They will say, I just, they'll even prepare to bypass and to do whatever needs to be done just to shut up somebody on the other side. Here is what you need. You've been asking me for the tax, for this, etc. And it's fine. But they don't understand why.
Yeah.
And that defeats growth. Because if you don't understand why, they will receive that opportunity and proceed and do the opposite thing and not build an empire or an enterprise because they didn't understand what was happening there. What is the reason why every organization you go to wants these ducks in order? And that's corporate governance, doing the right things the right way.
Right.
And that's back to knowledge. Yeah, because, Maya Angelou says, you do what you do until you know better. And when you know better,
do better.
you do better.
That's it.
That's my closing remark.
And-
So they can
and I-
only do better. First, they'll only do that because that's what they know.
Yeah.
If there's no mentor, that's what we know. So whether it's disorganized, that's what they know. And when they know better, you must do better. But then the mentor holds you accountable and says, that's not the direction to go this direction.
Yeah.
And maybe just on mentorship. Okay, I have a mentorship program. And I can tell you now, literally, if this young girl comes to me and she has a proposal, I can mentor her up or down.
Yeah.
There's another question mark there. Because to just blanket mentorship is not enough for a developing country. I can literally identify her insecurities, her vulnerability, and press on them. Or have a change of heart and take her to hay. So we also need a certain caliber of mentors. Because if mentors was the solution, why are the people being mentored down or left hanging? Just on the door of breakthrough, they literally left hanging. So the quality of the mentor is questionable, and we need a criteria. Critical. Otherwise, that young girl who could have been exporting by next year this time becomes a suicide victim through my dementoring, and it's very dangerous.
Too many people call themselves mentors.
And they are not. Yeah, it's not enough.
not
It's a
just-
responsibility. You are like a shepherd. These sheep belong to you. This one is limping. This one is thirsty. That one needs to be taken out to get into a healing center.
Yeah.
You need to be responsible. So the spirit, the personality of that person needs to be put under a radar. Otherwise, why are they not growing? If mentorship was so the kind of mentors must be interrogated, and then we put a stamp on them, because that's to say you've got white hair, mentor the young girl, dangerous.
Enough, yes.
Yeah.
So I think
submission.
Yes,
Okay.
Ms. Kadhikwa, sorry for cutting you there, but you've all mentioned very critical things that the guy on the street wants to hear, but not only the guy on the street, the guy who's going into medium business and all those growth stages.
I wish them all the best.
Yes, definitely all the best. But they would have wanted to hear all these things, but they would have wanted to hear more practical, examples of how can we do tenders much better than we have done, and so forth. But unfortunately, we don't have the time on this session and on the set to do that. But I think you have imparted a lot of knowledge and wisdom from the banking side. There are certain things that need to be in place for entrepreneurs to flourish and to get funding and to flourish into a next stage. From ownership end, you've also mentioned that it's critical to have governance in place, and we just need to train people even the more for them to perceive the importance of governance, and also how can we practically get things in place that need to be in place for us to thrive to the next stage. And this is why the Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance is there, and we want to start placing even more emphasis on SMEs. And from tonight, as an executive director, even the more, because of my understanding of the statistics that you've given, and also the importance that you have sketched to me and to Namibia generally about the importance of SMEs. And we want to be able to impart knowledge to SMEs through training. So if you're an SME out there, please do reach out to us at info@nicg.org.na. And if you go on our website, just type in NICG and you'll be able to find us. You reach out to us, and certainly we will ensure to be able to reach out to the experts that are on this platform, and perhaps people who are also just growing in their own selves, and they can mentor, they can grow you, and they can help you. And when we have training sessions, we can make sure that we adequately train from the banking side and from the very practical experiences on the floor. And thank you so much, my team, for being here tonight. I thank you for honoring my request. I really appreciate what we could achieve tonight. And also thank you to the viewers for all the comments that you sent through, and they were very interesting to read. And thank you so much for joining us every Thursday. We appreciate your support to Fireplace Conversations, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session. Thank you. Have a good night.